Well, good evening, everybody. This is Marcus Allen. Feel free to call me Mark. And today is Thursday, November 8th, 2012 at precisely 8:10 Thursday night. Already mentioned that it's Thursday. And that is unusual for me. I normally never do calls on Thursday, but tonight we have actually something that's incredibly rare because I've never done this before, and that is I'm going to interview someone. And it's rare because, and ironic because my job during the day is to interview people, specifically interview people in the internet marketing space. But when it comes to my website, truthin7minutes.com, that's the number 7, in the almost 5 years that I've been doing this, I don't recall ever interviewing someone. So tonight, I feel so awkward with this because we're so informal when we do these calls. But tonight, we have Brian Tuohy, who is the author of, I dare say, the most dangerous book probably ever somewhat mainstream published. Correct me if I'm wrong, Brian. This is a mainstream published book that you have called The Fix Is In, right?
I would believe it would be mainstream published. Yeah.
Well, when is it in the bookstores? Can you get it in the bookstore?
Yeah.
That would be mainstream.
Amazon, Barnes & Noble, you name it, it should be there.
That's amazing. So how did I hear about Brian? I'm trying to remember back. It was only about maybe a month ago, and I highly recommend that you drop everything right now, whether you're listening to us live or most of you are going to be listening to a recording of this, and you go to his website, and I'll say it slow. It's thefixisin.net. Once again, that's thefixisin.net. If you planned on doing something after about 10 minutes, don't go to the website because I guarantee you will not be able to escape all of the information that he has on that website. I mean, I've literally invested. In fact, I should probably call the police because you've stolen a lot of my time, Brian, with all the amazing stuff that you have on that website. It's just truly amazing. In fact, tonight before this call, I don't know if this is a new post you did, that over hour-long thing where, let me get that quote.
Oh, we sell fantasy?
Yep, we sell fantasy. We don't sell reality, and we have grown men and women in costumes playing for millions of dollars and, more importantly, enthralling tens of millions of people. And furthermore, we sell competition. Our teams and our athletes have to be bitter rivals and competitors on the field of play, but they've got to be partners off the field of play, and we need rules. We sell uncertainty of outcome, and so we need rules, both playing rules and, frankly, we need economic rules, and it goes on and on and on. And
that quote comes from the president of Major League Baseball.
Here's what I want to do. See, in the over 100 interviews that I've seen you involved in, especially the one with Howard Eskin, which that guy is a fraud, a total fraud. He was completely giving you what's known as the Delphi technique, and we'll talk about that a little bit later. But here's what I want to do. I want to turn this interview over to you and do something that no one's ever done, at least that I could see, and that is not interrupt you. So I would like you to give like the greatest elevator pitch to the people who listen to me, and tell us, why pro sports is fixed and rigged, and take all the time you desire. And when you're done, I've got two other people who regularly join me. I've got Robert from Los Angeles, California, who I expect to be on the call shortly, and I have Chris from Oklahoma, and we have a bunch of questions we want to ask you. So are you cool with that? You want to give the elevator pitch, and I'll put the mute button on myself.
Oh, you don't have to mute yourself. I don't want to go on a huge diatribe or rant. I mean, that's not the way I really roll. But the basic idea of the book, where it came from was I was a fan of professional sports. And at a certain point in time in the past, I realized that the leagues were lying to me. I realized they were lying to me about, gamblers involved in sports. They were lying to me about the drugs that infiltrate sports. They were lying to me about the criminals that played the game. And the owners have the ability to control everything that surrounds the games themselves, including the media that's supposedly the watchdog for fans, because the media funds professional sports. All the major networks put money into the NFL. They put money into the NBA, Major League Baseball, the NHL when it's actually playing, NASCAR. and all that money funds professional sports. It fuels it. So this media is not really a separate entity from the sports. They actually own sports to a certain extent. So because these leagues can't control everything that surrounds the games, I asked the question, a very basic question, is would you leave a multi-billion-dollar industry up to chance? Because that's what these leagues are. Last year, the NFL, Major League Baseball, NBA, and NHL combined made about $25 billion. And that doesn't account for the money that like Adidas and Nike and all the other advertising partners of these leagues made as well from sponsoring these professional sports. And I don't think a good business sense would be to leave these things up to chance, because the leagues have both the means and the motives to manipulate the outcomes of their own games if they so desire, because that would create more fan interest, higher TV ratings, more ad revenue, and thus more profit for everybody involved. And that's basically what I do with the book. I try to present that information and show that perhaps these games are not as random as you think they are, that they're not left up to coincidence, that they're manipulated for a very specific reason, and that's to make money, because that's the best business decision they can make. Mm-hmm. And that's the gist of it.
If you had to bet your entire life savings on the idea, the premise of your book, that professional sports, whether it's NASCAR, I guess we can't say wrestling because they've admitted that that's entertainment purposes only, right?
Exactly. Well, so have the professional leagues to a certain extent.
Oh, I know, and that's what's so amazing about this is that I could show people this video that we were just talking about, and they still will not believe that it's fixed. So you've got NASCAR, of course, NFL, NHL, NBA, and MLB, the four major sports here in the United States. We have a lot of people who listen from outside the United States. Soccer. By the way, did you know about the ESPN? I think I sent that to you. The ESPN expose that every single soccer game was rigged. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't hear about that.
Would that surprise you?
No. Well, in a sense it would, because I don't believe every game is fixed. Okay? Mm-hmm. Now, people say you can't have it both ways, but I think you can, because I think that some games are basically unimportant to the leagues, that they don't matter, they don't need to be fixed. I think what the leagues do is when they see a specific storyline or they see a certain team that they feel needs to succeed, then they will manipulate these games to get the results that they desire, because those are ones that would be most financially beneficial to the leagues. But I don't think they fix everything. Mm-hmm. I just think that certain occasions they will tip the scales a certain way when they need to. And if it's only happened once, if I'm completely wrong, if I'm completely nuts, that I think all these games have been rigged, but if there was just one game rigged in the NFL, for example, just one game out of the past 50 years, well, instantly the league loses every ounce of credibility it claims to have.
That's right. They lose the benefit of the doubt.
Yeah, just one game. So, I mean, you may think I'm nuts, and I know certain fans think I am crazy for spouting this information, but the truth is if they fixed one game, like, for example, one of my beliefs is they fixed Super Bowl III for the merger between the AFL and the NFL back in 1969, then the league's credibility from that point forward was completely gone.
I'd like to talk to you about that, because I think there's an even more obvious fixed Super Bowl, but I've heard you say that before. So what's like the smoking gun about Super Bowl III that hit you?
Well, I think it's the result itself. I mean, back at that time, because this was the best business decision the NFL and the AFL could make. At that time, there was two separate leagues, and they're battling each other. They were stealing draft picks from each other. They were stealing players from each other. They're affecting each other negatively financially by doing this, and they finally agreed to merge the two leagues. The problem they had was that fans of the NFL, which had been around much longer than the AFL, didn't think AFL football was to the caliber of the NFL football at all. And even in New York City, which was a huge mecca for football, like for every 3 Giants fans, there were maybe 1 New York Jets fan. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, the NFL had the power, they had the fan base, and to bring these teams in was, in a sense, causing a problem. So when they decided to do the merger, they did the first Super Bowl and the second Super Bowl, and basically the Green Bay Packers smashing the Chiefs and then the Raiders proved NFL fans that AFL football was inferior to NFL football. But then came Super Bowl III, which is right on the verge of the actual merger, and suddenly we had this star quarterback in Joe Namath, who was a big deal in New York, big deal in football. He really changed the face of professional football to this day, playing against literally the best NFL team there had ever been up to that point, and really up until very recently. The Baltimore Colts that season were, I think their average margin of victory was like 18 or 19 points, which was a record up until the New England Patriots of about 2 or 3 years ago. I mean, they were a dominating team. They were a dominating force. They had the MVP and Earl Morrall in the quarterback. And when it came to that Super Bowl, the Baltimore Colts completely and utterly fell apart, completely collapsed. And if you watch that game, there are plays that the Colts should have made that they didn't make. There are even questions within the Colts team. Bubba Smith, who recently passed away after that game, said he was certain that game was set up for the New York Jets to win because he realized, like I do and many others realized, that the Jets winning established the AFL as a legitimate league. It established the merger, and it made literally billions of dollars for all the owners. And that's why I think that's one of the main smoking guns in this supposed theory I have of these games being rigged, is because it would have been the best business decision to make to have the Jets win it because it benefited everyone, even the teams not playing in that game.
Right. Who benefits, right? You know, Q bono, is it? That the Latin phrase for that?
Might be. I never learned Latin.
Because I was going to ask you what XLIV, Super Bowl XLIV, is in Roman numerals. And
44.
Is that what it is?
XLIV. Yeah, I think so.
And you had on your website about Peyton Manning slipping up Super Bowl 44. You want to talk about that?
Well, that's funny because that's one of the things I've taken the most heat for from, suppose, legitimate sports fans is I believe that Peyton Manning intentionally threw the Super Bowl against the New Orleans Saints to ensure that the Saints won that year because it basically completed the NFL storyline which had been going on since Hurricane Katrina destroyed, the Gulf Coast and especially New Orleans, and that the NFL and the New Orleans Saints was bringing back and revitalizing the city of New Orleans single-handedly. And this team that had been completely worthless, completely inept for 40 years, suddenly, as soon as Hurricane Katrina ended, suddenly became a powerhouse, suddenly became a force to be reckoned with, despite the fact that they had turned over like 2/3 of the roster and got an entirely new coaching staff. They suddenly became an NFL powerhouse. And they built that up. They kept playing that storyline. They wound up on Visa commercials and in other places. And then they were in the Super Bowl, and sure enough, they won. And interestingly, the quarterback for the opposing team was Peyton Manning, who, lo and behold, had grown up in New Orleans. He was a native son of New Orleans because his dad, Archie Manning, was a longtime quarterback of the New Orleans Saints.
Right, played for the Saints, right?
Yeah. And so I just asked the question, is it possible that Manning intentionally threw that game away? Because I watched the game, and the Peyton Manning I saw in that game that I've seen in numerous other games didn't play the way Peyton Manning normally plays. Right. And it's really hard. And I understand that you cannot judge whether a game was fixed or not necessarily by watching game film. I mean, the FBI knows this. Other people know this. You can't. Because you can't tell if a guy had a bad game because he just had a bad game or he had an intentionally bad game. But it's the only evidence in a certain extent we have to go on. And the way Manning played, especially the interception that gave the game away, was a really questionable pass, in my opinion, right to the Saints defender, which is something Peyton Manning rarely, if ever, does. Right,
and if you watch the video, which you have on your website, once again, it's the Fix is in, that's THE, Fix is in.net. You have a little tab at the top, I think, that has that specific background on that particular play and what you think about that.
Yeah, and like you say, it's something I've taken a lot of heat for. I mean, Deadspin attacked me for writing that piece, and then I was on an interview with, which I found really interesting, on some station in Washington, D.C., where I was on with they had 5 sports radio hosts at the same time, which I just found bizarre to begin with. But they just wouldn't let up on me on the fact that I wrote that. I mean, they just would not. And I kept saying, well, there's other evidence I have, better evidence I have. Why don't we get to that? And amazingly, that interview, I got a member of the Redskins who happened to be listening to the radio at that time so upset that he had to call in and talk to me during the radio show. And what I found funny was his only argument against what I had written about Manning and all this was that I was crazy. He said it, you're crazy. You can't think that way. It's nuts. Peyton Manning would never do that. You're crazy. And I said, well, let me ask you one question. And I think he's still on the Redskins, was Lorenzo Alexander. He's a linebacker. I said, I've heard from a member of the Professional Football Writers of America who I did an interview with on his radio show. He told me at least 75% of the NFL players are taking human growth hormone, HGH.
Mm-hmm.
I said, is that true? Are there guys taking steroids in the league? And he admitted right there in the air, oh, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Because I think I completely caught him off guard by asking the question. I asked him one question. I got him to admit that players are taking steroids against league's rules. And suddenly the 5 guys who were attacking me suddenly turned and attacked the Redskin player, and then all of a sudden the interview went completely haywire.
I don't know how, quite frankly, I don't know how you do it because, I mean, you're calling in people like Howard Eskin. You remember calling Howard Eskin, don't you?
Well, they call me for the interviews, but yeah, I remember being on with him.
I mean, he completely did ad hominem attacks on you. That is, you should look this up. It's called the Delphi technique. They completely Delphi techniqued you. It was ridiculous, and I that's why I don't do interviews anymore. I used to do interviews. See, on this broadcast, what we do is we talk about life's hoaxes. I mean, everything from the breakup of the family to fluoride in our water and all that kind of stuff. We're kind of like, I know you've been on Alex Jones. We don't like Alex Jones at all. We think that he's a distractor, doesn't really talk about solutions, and we talk about solutions here. The right things to eat. Are eggs good for you? Are they bad for you? That sort of thing. That's the sort of thing that we try to talk about. And I would never do what you. I mean, I admire you because you're going on these. You're going to get attacked, right?
Oh yeah, basically. I mean, and at first, for having never done this before, because The Fix Is In was the first and only book so far that I've published, this was all new to me.
Uh-huh.
And, at first, I was a little apprehensive about doing these things because I knew they were going to come after me, and it's hard to tell sometimes how hard they're going to come after you, why they're coming after you, what angle they're going to take. And so I was just like, all right, whatever. What happens, happens. I'm just trying to spread the word about the book, and if I can get on a major, radio station and, maybe get through to at least one person who will go out and buy the book, so be it. I'll take my lumps, bring it on. And the more I've done it, the more confident I've gotten, the more I've, able to understand their arguments, the more I can make better arguments against them and show more evidence and more proof of these things, the smoother everything's gotten for me.
Right. See, I think the problem with this angle is that, like, for example, the thing that you're taking the most heat with is it's a theory. It's like, you can have people attack you. I prefer to go after stuff that no one can attack you, where everyone would agree with you. And I'll give you an example. Do you remember, and I think it was against the Seahawks, the Steelers versus the Seahawks in the Super Bowl?
Yep.
On the 1-yard line, and he never crossed the 1-yard line, and they called it a touchdown. And not only that, they went to replay, and they still called it a touchdown when everyone on the planet knew it wasn't a touchdown. And then wasn't it the next play when Seattle scored some big-time play, there was an offensive holding, and the guy didn't even touch the guy, and they called it back? Am I thinking?
Yeah, there was something. I know what you're talking about. I don't remember the exact play, but there's a lot of that. And that's what I've been more and more trying to point out when I get on these sports radio shows, is that there are certain things you see as a fan. For me, one of the most recent ones I brought up is in the playoffs last year between the Packers and Giants, where there was a play where Packers receiver Greg Jennings caught a pass. He was tackled, and as he was being tackled, he clearly fumbled the football, and the Giants recovered. Mm-hmm. And I was in a room, because I live in Wisconsin, with literally like 30 Packer fans. And they showed the instant replay because it went to be reviewed by the officials. And everybody in the room who were clearly had a rooting interest for the Packers said, man, he just fumbled the football.
Right.
And then the referee comes out and says, no, it wasn't a fumble.
Right. That's what I mean. So everyone on the planet, even the people that benefited, it said, oh, well, we got lucky on that one.
Yeah. Well, they knew. Right there was a clear, concise, obvious manipulation of a football game. And it was done basically, in my opinion, to keep the Packers close and keep them in it because they were getting their heads kicked in this game. Mm-hmm. And the NFL wanted to keep this game interesting as long as possible. Mm-hmm. And I think they do that sometimes too. I think they try to stop games from being a blowout. I mean, you look at the past, I forget how many it is, like 10, 12 Super Bowls. You have had a game that has literally come down almost to the final minutes every time. Mm-hmm. Because they want to keep people watching to the very end. They want to keep their advertisers happy. They want to keep the broadcasting partners happy because everybody makes money when these things happen.
Mm-hmm. You used to write articles
I was going to say, there one other thing just in football recently, too, was you had in a Monday night game like 2 years ago where after the game, the coach, Jeff Fisher of the Tennessee Titans, said in his post-game press conference that at the 2-minute warning, the head referee approached him and said, "You need to call your timeouts because ESPN needs to run more commercials."
Right, I saw you talk about that.
And that's a big deal. And he refused to because he was like, got
to save him up.
Well, they had already won the game. They were winning like 23-3. The game was over.
Oh, okay.
He was like, "I just want to end this game." Well, the referee walked across the field to the opposing coach, Jack Del Rio of the Jaguars, told him the same thing, and Del Rio did exactly what the referee asked. Mm-hmm. He called timeouts, and it wound up that the Titans scored and even won by more points. But after the game, Fisher confessed to all this, mm-hmm. which is a clear manipulation. I mean, more obvious than anything manipulation, where you have somehow the network is able to tell the referee to tell the coach to call his timeouts.
Right. Well, that gets into crossing over to NASCAR, because in NASCAR you talked about somewhere, again, on your website, thefixisn.net, you talked about how NASCAR is going to have more yellow flags. I don't follow NASCAR that much. They're going to have more yellow flags because that's what they do in football, so we're going to do it too, type of thing?
Yeah, that was, I forget the guy who exactly said that, but he was someone high up in the motorsport industry, because I'm not a big NASCAR fan either. I don't understand the excitement of watching cars run around in circles. I don't get it. But yeah, he basically said exactly the same thing. He said the league, I guess you'd call NASCAR, needs to put up more caution flags because that tightens up the race, because everybody has to slow down while they clear whatever caused the caution out of the way, because that'll make these races more interesting and more exciting to the very end, which again is a clear manipulation of the sport. Because, and even there have been other drivers who have basically said the same thing, that the NASCAR is intentionally calling yellow flags to do this. That even Tony Stewart, who's one of the biggest race drivers there is, said on his own radio show that NASCAR has really gotten more and more like, professional wrestling than anything because of these sorts of manipulations.
Well, then we got to talk about the call. Tell us about the call.
Well, that's the great legend in NASCAR. And it was funny, actually, one of the first interviews I did was on the NASCAR network on a Sirius satellite radio. Mm. And the broadcaster was like, "Man, I haven't heard anybody bring up the call in like 20 years. But what the legend is that the call is literally a phone call that a driver would get from, the headquarters that said either like, today is your day or today is not your day, because we need a certain advertiser, a certain sponsor to do well and let the other guy win." And I think it's really easy to fix a car race, because horse races are fixed all the time.
Right.
I mean, horse racing is one of the most dirty sports there is in this country. I mean, by far, it really should almost be illegal for how corrupt it really is.
Right.
But the reason you can do it is because the horses don't say anything.
Right.
They can't talk about what happens to them. Well, the same thing with cars. Cars aren't going to tell you whether the driver's really got his, foot to the floor or not. They can't tell you if the car's been manipulated to go faster than other cars because of restrictor plates and these other things. So it's really easy to get away with that sort of manipulation in the sport.
This whole idea that it's about sponsorship is a total red herring distraction, because that's the guise that they're going to use if you ever get big time traction and it gets out that everything is rigged and fixed. Then they're just going to play it off as, it's all about the sponsors, when it's way more than about the sponsors, don't you think?
Well, I think it's everybody involved, because everyone is profiting. I mean, isn't that famous line, none dare call it conspiracy because everyone's profiting from it?
Right.
Right. And I think that's one of the reasons none of this really, it only kind of trickles out. It comes out in little odd quotes and little odd stories that pop up every now and again. And that's kind of what I culminated into that book, with all these supposed oddities, these all, isolated incidents, which really, when you put them all together, is not an isolated incident.
That's right.
A clear proof of a major amount of corruption that goes on within these professional sports.
Right. I have to say, one of the most fascinating things on your website, which at first was really hard to download, I think they've kind of fixed it, and that's when I first contacted you, if you remember, is when you were on vacation, and I think you went to the University of Florida?
Yeah.
That is a must-watch video. And why don't you give everyone like the 60-second Cliff Notes version of why it's so must-watch, of you and 4 or 5 other people on a panel?
Yeah, there were 5 of us on this panel. One was finance professor from somewhere in Florida. Another one was the author of the book Gaming the Game, which is about Tim Donaghy and basically his bookie more than anything. And how they were
Tim Donaghy, who don't know, is the referee who admitted gambling on his own games that he was reffing?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people think he fixed his games, but he was never arrested. He was never convicted of that. But everybody really within the gambling world knows he was fixing games. He just never got convicted of it. And he won't admit to it either because he would wind up being back on trial if he ever did admit to it.
Right.
But yeah, he was basically betting on games in which he officiated. But there was that author. There was a woman from Estonia who does research on tennis corruption and corruption in European sports. They had, which amazed me, he's the only lawyer for the ATP, the tennis tour. He was on the panel and myself, and basically the 2-hour discussion was all about corruption in sports.
But you had, if I remember right, I only got to watch about half of it. I kind of skimmed through it. There were at least 2 people who were trying to debunk the idea that sports is rigged. Is that right?
To an extent. The professor, the first professor from, I forget which college he was, from Florida, he did kind of a reverse study of another famous study which said that perhaps as many as 1 to 6% of all college basketball games are rigged because of the point spread and that sort of thing. And his kind of study kind of debunked this first guy's study. And then the lawyer for the ATP was basically promoting the fact that the ATP has set up this new kind of integrity unit, the tennis integrity unit, that's basically,
funny.
Yeah, I know, that's sniffing out all this corruption, because of which I had only recently learned before this, and a lot of people I don't even think realize that is tennis is literally the second most gambled upon sport in the world.
Soccer being number 1, right?
Yeah, but I would have never guessed tennis was number 2, but it is. That's how big it is.
That's amazing.
And the problem with tennis, and the reason why a lot of it really is corrupt, is that it's only the top, 2% of all players really make any money.
Yeah.
That a lot of the guys who are ranked, 350th, even if they win one of these minor tournaments, don't even necessarily make enough money in winning to cover their expenses to go and play in the tournament.
Right. It's a loss for them. Right.
Yeah, so it's a lot easier for them to either fix the match or be at least gambling upon their own matches to increase the revenue.
Right.
Because they can't make it to the top of the charts unless they start at the bottom, and there's no money at the bottom.
Yeah, so that guy who was representing the tennis faction, for lack of a better word, he was very slick and very convincing. He had, I'm a marketing guy. He had the, quash the objections down pat. He talked in a very calm voice. He didn't, look crazy and all that kind of stuff. He did a very, very good job. The person I was most impressed with, and I didn't really listen to you as much because I wanted to ask the questions like I'm doing it now, so I didn't want to be tainted by you doing it. So I didn't listen to much of you. But the person I was impressed with, and he has a very boisterous personality, I think was the guy from Philadelphia.
Yeah, that's Sean Patrick Griffin. He's the author of that book, Gaming the Game.
Be honest. What do you think of him? Do you like him?
Well, yes and no. I mean,
I knew you would say no, so tell us why you say no. We don't care about the political correct stuff here. Get into it. What don't you like about it?
The problem part of it is because I'm a Midwestern guy, born and raised in the Midwest. Is he was a Philadelphia cop.
Philly
and
guy.
There's something about there's something about that attitude, that kind of I know it all.
Yeah.
You don't know what you're talking about here. Let me explain it to you type. He had that kind of presence about him.
Yeah.
And it's funny because I showed my wife, because she wanted to see. She didn't go to Florida State with me, but I showed her the video afterwards.
Mm-hmm.
And I said, you should watch this guy because he's really interested. And she got about 2-3 minutes into it, and she's like, yeah, turn it off. Yeah, she's like, no, enough of him.
He's the Howard Stern of storytelling about what's going on in sports, I guess. You either love him or you hate him.
Yeah, but his research is excellent.
Unbelievable.
And the book he wrote was very, very good.
Was it?
I won't knock him and what he did by any means. I mean, personality-wise, it may be a conflict there, but actually what he did in his research is very interesting. It's very telling because he got into something that, and that's the same thing with my book, no professional sports writer will get into. Mm-hmm. And I think that's one of the biggest problems with covering sports is the ESPNs and the Sports Illustrateds, and there's not really much else out there actually in terms of, national sports media, doesn't do any investigative reporting. They really don't.
Well, it's because that would be like a cop giving themselves a speeding ticket.
Exactly. And that's the biggest issue, is that they don't investigate the corruption. I mean, when I think it was Ohio State had the big issue where players were trading jerseys for tattoos and they got in trouble and the coach got fired over all this nonsense. Sports Illustrated did like a big investigative probe of Ohio State and all the troubles that were going on there. Well, big deal. It was already a known scandal. Why didn't Sports Illustrated, just throw a dart at a map of the United States and go to the biggest, college football program near where that dart landed and investigated that? Because I guarantee you could have found recruiting violations and many other things going on, because it's going on at every major college in the United States with a big football program. So, I mean, they're not really doing any investigative reporting. And even when they had steroids in baseball, which was a known entity for 10 years, they did absolutely nothing. Then Tom Ferducci of Sports Illustrated, after all is said and done, after McGuire and Sosa and Barry Bonds and all that, he writes an article about, oh, God, there's steroids in baseball. They're horrible. And everybody gave him a big pat on the back. And it just baffled me, because where were the baseball writers of America 10 years ago when this problem was really going on? Where were they when it started, when Jose Canseco was doing it and people knew he was doing it, and he was, like he even said, he was like the godfather of steroids in baseball. Instead, when he writes his book, they attack him and say, oh, these are all lies, he's crazy. But you know what? He's 100% right. But they didn't do anything about it. I mean, that's my problem. It's the sports media, which, again, they're supposed to be the watchdogs for us, aren't. They're instead involved in being the rah-rah kings of, professional sports, because, again, they make money off them. And in many cases, like ESPN, they fund football. They fund the NBA. They used to fund the NHL. They fund Major League Baseball. So you're not going to shoot your foot and investigate these things, because it's going to cost you money.
I have a huge list of like 1 and 2 word topics that I just like to throw at you and answer them as fast as you'd like.
All right.
NHL lockout.
It proves that sports are a business. That's all about money. I mean, that's the bottom line.
So do you really – see, we talk here about the reason and the real reason for things. We're told that the reason publicly that they do something is X, where the real reason, because we're the ultimate, I guess, conspiracy theories. You like to which I hope you can change this. You call yourself the greatest sports conspiracy theorist, and I think that just is like is a great way for people to slam you and call you a kook. I think what you're talking about is a conspiracy conclusion, not a theory.
True. That is true.
So hopefully you can change that on your website. But we talk about the reason and the real reason for things. What is the real reason? I mean, the NHL and any other professional sports team could hire college athletes to replace these people, and it would be probably a more exciting game. So what's the real reason that they're having these lockouts and stoppages and all that kind of stuff? What do you think about that?
Well, it's the same thing as to why they allow athletes who get in trouble with the law a second or third or fourth chance. Because there's a whole, like you say, a whole litany of other players out there who can fill these shoes.
Yeah.
And I think to a certain extent there is, there are special players. There are guys who can do things that other guys cannot do. I mean, they're the, top, 0.01% of each league that are really special, the Wayne Gretzky's, the Michael Jordans. Certain guys really can do things that other players just can't do, no matter how much they practice, train, what have you. Mm-hmm. So I think they're afraid to lose some of that. But I really think it all comes down to money. And I think they're really just battling over the slice of the pie. I don't know. It's hard to know what really goes on behind the scenes and behind the closed doors in those meetings, what they're really talking about in the lockout. Because I don't understand how, like the NHL's been locked out since sometime this summer. How many times can you negotiate this stuff? I mean, isn't it pretty simple? We make X amount of money. The players should be entitled to this amount. The owners get the other amount. Let's get done. Let's get out of here. What else is there to argue about? I don't know. I don't get it.
I don't know. I used to follow professional hockey. It was my favorite sport to follow. And I would much rather watch an AHL game, the minor league games, tons more hitting, tons more excitement, tons more scoring, tons more fights, everything, than I would watching a professional hockey game where they now make tens of millions of dollars per year. I think the real reason goes way beyond what we can imagine the reason is for this lockout.
It could very well be, and a lot of the fans, I think, like you talk about though, with the NBA, enjoy college basketball much more than the NBA.
Absolutely, right.
It's because it's more of the, and I don't want to use the word pure, but
right.
That's the best word I come up with, pure sport than the professional level has become. Because it's like once these guys have all this money, kind of have the security, have this, a holier than thou attitude, it essentially changes the game, the makeup of the game, and how it's played. And I think part of it is because some of these things are outright manipulated, that they're not really playing, they're not really giving the 110%, they're not really giving it their all like fans believe, because they know certain outcomes, I think, are predetermined.
Mm-hmm. Do you think Donovan McNabb was worth $100 million playing for the Eagles?
Oh, God, no.
Do you think Donovan McNabb was worth $1 million playing for the Eagles?
Probably.
$1 million.
Well, how much exactly? It's hard to say. I mean, when you have the NFL's making $10 billion a season through all their different revenue streams, people are going to the games and watching the games because of the athletes. I don't think they really care that there's an Eagle logo on the side of the helmet or a Bears logo or a Packers logo. For the most part, they're really going to see the athletes supposedly compete and perform at their peak, and this is the best the game can get. So I think if, $100 is being spent on a game, that really the vast amount of that should go to the players because they're the attraction. So I do think that, there is a value for what the athletes do and what their performance is and the risks. I mean, they do take physical risks. That's all part of it as well. So I do think they should be compensated, and I think they should actually make more than the owners do. They should get a bigger slice of the pie.
Speaking of performance, because I'm big into words, like, for example, on TV they call it programming. But, that's what you do to a computer. You're programming a computer. And their programming is programming us. So when I see this, here's another word I wanted to get your comment about, and let's see if you get it. Act 2. You know what I'm talking about when I say Act 2 on Sunday Night Football?
Oh, well, it's the second half of the game.
Why do they call it, and why does everything have to do with, and again, I'll quote from what that guy said before. Let me pull that up. We sell fantasy, we don't sell reality, and it's all about drama. Why are they, is this like their legalistic little inside joke on the public saying, see, we're telling you what it is. You're not listening to us, so we'll keep rolling with it. They call it Act 2. It's an act.
Yeah. I mean, I think, you hear many times, and I even have a few quotes in the book where someone higher up within one of these leagues will say, boy, we couldn't have scripted it any better than that.
I know.
And I've heard them too. They've even, I think it was Robert Kraft, who's the owner of the Patriots, was said to the New York Times that we have the best reality television show on TV.
Right.
And it's like, well, you know that reality TV isn't real, right?
Right.
You realize that these things are scripted, that they're edited in certain ways, that they restage certain events. And I mean, every reality program is guilty of this. So if you're calling yourself a reality TV show, well, then what's really going on? In fact, there's one thing I just learned, and I haven't gotten quite my head around it all, so I won't be able to explain this much further than what I'm going to say, but there was a lawsuit between Stats Inc. And the NBA in the late 90s, I believe it was, where the judges ruled that the only way really these leagues can copyright their own footage and copyright their games is if they're scripted. And yet it's true that every game is copyrighted because every time you watch a football game, before the game they say, this is a presentation of the NFL.
Right.
It's not a presentation of CBS or Fox, and if you wanted to use the footage, you don't go to CBS or Fox really to get permission. You have to go to the NFL.
Right.
They own it. So these judges basically said the only way they can own it is if they're scripting it.
And isn't it interesting that the heads of almost every position in professional sports are lawyers?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they know what they're doing. for a very real reason. I mean, they argued in front of the Supreme Court, the NFL just, I think it was 2010, they argued that we are an entertainment industry. And in fact, a lot of them will flat out admit we're entertainment. Their entertainment is sports. It doesn't mean sport is something different than entertainment. It doesn't mean sport is any different than, a movie.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, it's just entertainment. And I think that's why people need to look at these things as entertainment. You want to spend 3 hours watching a baseball game? Fine, I don't care. But realize what you're watching is entertainment. It's not, your life and your breath and everything that should matter to you in that game. It should just be, a pastime, as baseball is called.
Yeah. Tell me who Michael Franzese is and what you think about him.
Michael Franzese, he's an interesting dude. He was a former capo in the Colombo crime family. And at one point he was making supposedly $6 to $8 million a week in the mob. And since he got arrested, and I forget exactly how he got arrested, but he wound up going to jail, and in jail he became a born-again Christian. And he had supposedly a contract out on his life, and he got out of it somehow. And ever since then, since he's become born again, he's gone around the country basically talking about the mafia and what they do and how to get out of it. And one of the things he talks about often is fixing sporting events, because apparently he used to do it.
Mm-hmm. Right from his mouth, right?
Yeah, and I find it very interesting that, and I just got a video from the FBI, which I guess I wasn't supposed to get, which I found very interesting, that the leagues used to make what they called sports bribery presentations. I mean, the FBI used to make sports bribery presentations to the leagues, and they did it to the NCAA as well, warning players about the dangers of gambling and drugs and how not to get compromised and that sort of thing. And Franzese was used on this video, and he's also spoken to teams, I guess, in person as well about fixing games. Now, the interesting thing to me is the NFL, for example, says we've never had a game fixed ever in our 90-year history, not once.
And they have to say that. I would say that, too, if I did.
But Franzese, he doesn't claim he's fixed an NFL game. Well, he's never actually said what he's fixed. He refuses to talk about it specifically. But why would the league hire a guy to talk about fixing football games who perhaps has no experience in it?
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I mean, you would either he's lying, either Francese's lying about fixing professional sporting events because, NFL says it's never happened. Baseball hasn't happened since 1919. Basketball since 1954. I mean, he had to fix something. So either you're hiring a liar to talk about this, or you're hiring a guy who knows exactly what he's talking about because he's done it from experience.
You have a video on your blog about with him talking about this, right?
A couple of them, yeah, they're out on YouTube. Because he talks about it at college too, because college is even easier to fix because poor kids don't get paid for their work.
Right.
So I mean, it's very easy to plop a couple $1,000s in front of a guy who knows he's not going to make the NBA or the NFL and get him to shave points in the game. I mean, I think it's extremely easy, easier than people believe. But yeah, he talks about it openly. He just won't get specific. He won't name names. He won't say exactly what he's fixed. But supposedly he's fixed Yankees games and some other, major sporting events.
For those of who don't follow NASCAR, kind of like me, I guess like you too, Brian, one of the most popular NASCAR drivers of the modern era would have to be Dale Earnhardt Sr., would you say?
Well, Senior and Junior, yeah, both.
Mm-hmm. And, of course, those who do follow NASCAR were incredibly saddened to learn and watch as he tapped, and I'm being nice, the wall and died racing. What do you think about that?
His actual death? It's really bizarre, and people probably think I'm crazy or nuts for saying this, but I happen to be watching it for some strange reason.
Me too.
And the instant it happened, and I don't know why, I said to myself, he's dead. I don't know how. It's like I knew it. It's like I knew it the instant it happened. I have no idea why, because really the accident, you've seen much, much more vicious accidents.
It was not, I said tap, and I was being nice. It literally tapped the wall.
Yeah. But some reason, like I said, I'm really not making this up. I had just one of those sixth sense moments where I said, "Oh my God, he's dead," and it's it's bizarre that it happened in the way it happened. But to me, they don't let any tragedy go. How's the phrase go? They don't let
they don't
tragedy go to waste.
Go to waste, right? Mm-hmm.
And that's, the whole thing with his son winning at the same track, like just 3 months later in some sort of dramatic fashion. I think that was one of the most rigged races in NASCAR history that followed it up.
Right. By the way, do you know who won the Super Bowl the year of 9/11?
The Patriots.
Isn't that something?
Yeah. Well, that was kind of like the tipping point for me.
Was it? Tell us about that.
I think I had already written, I believe by that time, I had already written an article for an old magazine called Paranoia that was all about how the NFL fixed its own games, or maybe fixed their own games.
Mm-hmm.
And the following, I think, like I say, it was right about the same time the Patriots wound up winning that Super Bowl. And I knew it was going to happen. It was like I knew it was going to happen. I knew they were going to, even though they were huge underdogs, I said, they're pushing this through. The NFL is literally making this happen.
Mm-hmm.
And when they won, I was like, well, this really just kind of confirmed everything I believed. It was like, all right, I know I'm on the right track. I know I'm doing the right thing because this just isn't real anymore.
Did you ever hear of the acronym MIHOP and LIHOP?
No.
LIHOP means let it happen on purpose, and MIHOP means make it happen on purpose. So that was a MIHOP, no doubt about it. Same thing with the Saints winning after Katrina. That's a MIHOP.
Yeah.
No doubt about it for me, but, everyone calls me a kook too, so I guess we're in good company. For those who don't know who Pete Rose is, how would you classify Pete Rose, and what do you think about Pete Rose?
Pete Rose is an all-world scumbag. That's the way I classify him.
Keep going.
For those who don't know, he was banned from baseball for gambling on his own games. And a lot of people still think, because he's got the most hits in Major League Baseball history when he was a player, but this all occurred when he became a manager, and he's the manager of the Cincinnati Reds. He was gambling on Reds games. Now, it's something he didn't admit to for 20-some-odd years. At first, he said he never bet on baseball. Then he finally capitulated and said, I did bet on baseball, but never on my own team. And then he capitulated again and said, okay, yeah, I did bet on my own team. And, sooner or later, I think, I'm sure he's going to come out and almost say, I bet against my own team, too. But the thing is, the baseball writers, again, the same guys who should have protected the game with the steroid incident and all that, and failed completely, are so adamant about keeping Pete Rose out of the Baseball Hall of Fame because of his gambling. And to a certain extent, I agree with that. He should be. I mean, if baseball has number one rule, don't bet on baseball, and he broke that rule, then yeah, he should not be allowed in the Hall of Fame. But I don't think what they understand is even if Pete, because there's 162 games in the Major League Baseball season. Mm-hmm. Pete Rose didn't bet all 162 games on the Reds to win. He wasn't a dummy. Mm-hmm. He picked certain games to bet on his own team, which were games he thought he would likely win. Now the question is how far did he necessarily push his team to ensure that he won those bets? Mm-hmm. Because obviously, if you know much about baseball, that you can blow through and wear out your bullpen in certain games to almost ensure that you win a game, and push your team to the absolute limit, and then realize the next day that they're going to stink, and then he wouldn't necessarily bet on that next game. But the problem is those he was betting through, the bookies and such, obviously would recognize, well, Pete bet on the Reds tonight, and he bet on the Reds the night before, but he's not betting on the Reds tonight. Well, what does that mean to me, the bookie?
You're right.
Reds probably aren't going to win. So even though he may not have been actually going out and fixing games, he was likely manipulating them because of his betting habits, and then he was tipping off these bookies to know when not to bet the Reds. So, I mean, there was a lot of things he was influencing just by betting on his own team even. And that's something a lot of people don't comprehend about the whole situation.
Yeah, let's talk about that, about betting, because that's really the big, that's probably the big angle you're going with here, the big aha, is that this is all about the money and betting and, a lot of people don't know this, but the porn industry is only a few $1 billion a year industry. Making screws, pun intended, is only an $8 to $10 billion a year industry. Tell everyone what professional sports is on a year-by-year basis.
Well, the four major leagues, baseball, football, basketball, and hockey, alone make last year, the revenue, I think, was about $25 billion.
But that doesn't include illegal gambling, and tell everyone how much that is approximately.
Well, nobody knows. That's the scary part. The last time, I think it was a congressional investigation into gambling in the United States overall. They did an investigation in 1999, so this was 13 years ago, and their conclusion was anywhere from 80 to $380 billion is wagered illegally on sports each year.
Right.
And if you take even the low estimate, just go with the 80 billion, that's nearly 4 times as much as the leagues made combined. And at the same time, legally, in Nevada, where you can bet, on sporting events all over the place, they took in last year less than $3 billion on wagers.
Which means that when everyone thinks that all this money pours into Las Vegas, that too is a lie, right?
Pretty much. Because I've talked to sports gamblers, professional sports gamblers who live in Las Vegas, and guess what? They don't necessarily bet in Las Vegas because they can only bet a certain amount. Because if you bet anything over $10,000,
it's reported to the IRS, right?
It's reported. They take your Social Security number. They know who you are. So these guys live in Las Vegas, but they bet with illegal. They bet with illegal bookmakers in the United States. They don't even go offshore because they can't collect their money from offshore.
Oh, right.
So the guys living in Vegas, doing it professionally, doing it for a living, aren't necessarily betting where they live. They're betting in Chicago and New York and Los Angeles and all these other places where it's illegal. And they're basically funding organized crime because that's who runs most of the major bookmaking operations in this country.
Right. If you had to bet your life savings on this question, would you bet that the mob and professional sports are tied at the hip?
Yeah, I don't know if I bet my life savings on it. I bet a good hunk of change on it, let's put it that way. I mean, I think there's clearly, one of the things I've done, because I have another book that hopefully will come out sometime in 2013, that's all about sports gambling, game fixing from that aspect, and FBI investigations into these things. And it's clear that organized crime, because it really, one of the number one money makers for organized crime is illegal betting and betting on sporting events. And they clearly have the know-how on how to manipulate people. They know how to, find the weak point of a person and get them to do what they want them to do. I'm certain that they fixed games. I mean, again, Michael Franzese said he's done it, so if he did it, I'm sure others have done it as well. And some of the FBI files that I got through Freedom of Information Act pretty much spell this out, despite what the leagues tell you has never occurred. Certainly has occurred. It's hard to know how much they actually influence it, professional sports, on like an ownership level. And that's kind of a hard thing to quite sort out, but it's certain that original owners of the National Hockey League were tied to organized crime, and some of the original owners of the NFL, whose families still own the leagues, or teams like the Bidwell family in Arizona, the Mara family, the Rooney family, also had clear ties to organized crime and gambling when they started. So, I mean, there was clearly an influence at one point, whether and how much it still exists today, hard to sort out. But clearly the amount of gambling that goes on and the fact that it funds organized crime is a big thing that goes unmentioned and uninvestigated.
Right. Remember Archie Bunker? Remember the name of his sitcom show or TV show?
All in the Family, yeah.
That's what we have here.
Pretty much.
That's right. All right, so let's go off the professional sports rail. Let's go to the third rail. Let's talk about bicycling and Lance Armstrong. What do you think about that?
I knew Lance was guilty for a long, long time. Because, and my basic theory, and I had a friend who used to race bicycles. He used to do this, and he, oddly enough, my friend wound up having cancer. He beat cancer, and he kind of really idolized Lance Armstrong because they kind of had that same connection. I told him years ago, I said, you realize he's cheating, right? And my friend was like, no, there's no way, and he would give all these reasons. And I said, look, professional cycling is rife with performance-enhancing drugs and blood doping and all these things going on. And, I mean, it's rife. I mean, they get guys busted every year for doing this. And I said, Lance Armstrong is beating them all and beating them all handily. How is that possible? Unless he's Superman. He's got to be basically cheating better than the cheaters. Because the reason these people take steroids, do the blood doping and that sort of thing is because it makes them better. It makes them. That's why baseball players do it. That's why Olympians do it. That's why cyclists do it. They don't do it because it's fun. They don't do it because it makes them feel good. They do it because it makes them better. They are performance-enhancing drugs.
Mm-hmm.
And it's clear that, it was clear to me, like I say, a long time ago that Lance Armstrong was doing it. It's just that nobody, again, wanted to look into it until this kind of house of cards finally fell apart because they busted Floyd Landis, basically. He started the whole thing going.
Did you hear about his, there's some sort of triple crown here in the States, Philadelphia, Virginia, and maybe like Pittsburgh or something like that, where he got $1 million bonus if he won the Triple Crown. Did you hear about that?
No, I didn't hear about that one.
And like 5 of his team on his team admitted that they were given $50,000 to throw the race so that he'd win the $1 million.
Well, that's the sort of fixing that like makes absolute sense, and why I don't understand people don't think these things happen more often. I mean, we just saw it like in the Olympics. I mean, of all things, Olympic badminton was rigged.
Yeah.
Because of these sorts of agreements. And this happens in soccer a lot, too, and it supposedly happens in sumo wrestling and other things where it's like, you can do better if I lose, so I'll make sure I lose so you can do this, and then you give me that later. I mean, it's just, I'll scratch your back, you scratch mine type of deal.
Mm-hmm.
And it benefits everybody involved. I mean, it's very easy to do, and that's a clear situation where it can happen.
You have to be frustrated that people with seemingly enough common sense could hear the conclusions that you've come with in your book, on your website, talking to people, yet still they cannot fathom this happening. Do you ever think why that is?
To a certain extent, yeah. Because it's interesting to me was my friends thought I was a lunatic for a long time. For a very long time. Something would happen in some game we were watching or something, and I'd be like, dude, I'm pretty sure this is fixed because of X, Y, and Z. Oh, you're crazy. You're just talking this conspiracy nonsense and blah, blah, blah. Mm-hmm. Well, about a year ago, there was a group of us gathered, and somebody brought up something about, maybe this game was fixed, and he...
Uh-oh. Did we lose Brian? Can anyone hear me? But can't hear Brian. That's interesting. It is 9:08, Thursday, November 8th, 2012. And that's funny because Brian has always talked about how he's never been threatened. I was going to talk to him. That was going to be one of my next questions, actually. Hopefully, Brian will call back in. Oh, here we go. He did call back in. Are you there?
Did they cut us off?
They got to you.
Yeah, it's a matter of time before someone did. But anyway, like I was saying, I was with a group of friends who thought I was nuts for a long time.
Uh-huh.
And literally last year, someone threw out a question to like my group, and they said, do you think, basically, am I right? Do you think games have been fixed? And every one of them said yes.
Mm.
I mean, it took like 10 years. It took 10 years to kind of convince them of this, but they all went from thinking, and adamantly arguing against me. Adamantly, to turning to agreeing with me.
Was there a specific event or game or something that was like a tipping point for them, or just your constant droning on about it? Or
I have no idea. I don't know what made each one of them turn, to be honest. I really don't. I never asked them. But I find that is that it takes a while for this to kind of sink in, and I think if you get the idea in your head and you start watching games in a different light, if you start thinking of this as a business and you start realizing what would benefit the league and how these things benefit the league and how much revenue these teams share amongst each other, and then watch the games, that suddenly you start seeing things that should make you question what is really going on.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you do that enough that you may come to the same conclusion that it's really not exactly on the up and up, that it is entertainment, that they are willing to rig these own games for that purpose because it's making them all more money.
We talk about this all the time. Why is it that we'll show people exactly what happened on 9/11? I mean, there's no debunking it. We have it on a blog. We show step by step, and why they'll even agree with you. And why is it that they'll walk away from you and start repeating the official story all over again? And for me, it's pretty simple. It's such a whopper of a lie that most people can't imagine themselves doing such a whopper of a lie, that they can't imagine anyone else doing it. And you combine that with the fact that we assume that our whistleblowers in life, the ESPNs in this case for sports, 60 Minutes when it comes to other stuff, the newspapers, all the things that we've been told through our education system and our parenting, that they're there watching, doing the watching for us, when in reality you find out that they're actually working directly at the hip, tied to the hip with the people who are doing the scamming itself. I think that's a big reason why people can't wrap their heads around it.
Well, I think with sports, too, it has to do with a lot of sports fans, the athletes are like living out their dreams.
Right.
So they kind of think, well, God, if I was a professional, if I was the quarterback, there's no way I would do anything to jeopardize that or jeopardize my career and blah, 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 whatever position they idolize. But then they don't really think of the fact that it's a job, that playing 162 baseball games in a year is really physically demanding. It's a grind. It's a pain in the neck. Traveling to all these different places and playing baseball every day can wear you down. And then that these athletes have private lives. They may have problems with their wives, or they may have problems with their girlfriends, or even within their family, or, they may get addicted to drugs, or they may have their own gambling problems, or what have you, that there's all these other outside influences that affect them and could affect the performance on the field and could be used against them. Mm-hmm. So they don't think about it that way. They don't go that far. They just think, God, I always wanted to be a pitcher in the major leagues, and so why would this guy who lives my dream, why would he throw it away to do X, Y, or Z bad things?
Mm-hmm. Well, we are exactly an hour into this, and the only question I asked you off this call through an email was how much time did you have, and you thought you can go about 60 to 90 minutes. We're exactly at this right now. So if you need to get off for whatever reason, just say the word, and if not, I got lots more questions for you.
No, we can roll for like another half hour or so.
Okay, great. We'll do that. Let's talk about Mark Cuban. Any thoughts on Mark Cuban?
He's a very interesting character.
That's why I asked you. Mm-hmm.
I don't follow the NBA enough because I just really don't like the NBA. I find it very one of the things I kind of predicted, and I don't like really doing predictions because if I do a prediction, like I predicted the Colts would play the Saints in the Super Bowl. When that happened, everybody goes, well, everybody knew that.
Oh, okay.
And then if I predict something else happens and I'm wrong, then they say, well, see, your theories are just complete nonsense.
Right.
Because you couldn't predict it.
Right.
So it's like you can't win if you get it right.
Right.
And, it's just, so I rarely try to do them. But one of the things I pointed out was that if the Mavericks win the NBA championship right on the verge of this NBA lockout, that it would shut Mark Cuban up for the whole negotiation process because he's normally a very vocal owner and he's very pro-athlete for an owner. And sure enough, when they won the championship over the Heat, you didn't hear a peep from them during the NBA lockout. Not a thing, at least that I heard.
Mm-hmm.
And, I kind of followed it. I never heard him come out and say, God, we really should be playing the athletes more, or this, that, or other thing. He was absolutely silent. And I think in a very real way, maybe the NBA bought him off by giving him the championship he wanted.
Mm. But that's complete. You can't prove that. That's just your
no. It's
theory.
Speculation. But I just find it interesting that a guy who normally is. I mean, he used to, be standing, third row yelling at the referees because they blew a call or made a bad call against his team. And here in the lockout, one of the most vocal owners who has his own blog and really self-promotes the hell out of himself was absolutely silent, non-existent. Couldn't find him during this whole process.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So like I said, that's a theory that I think they paid him off with the championship to do so, but it's not something I can prove. But you kind of connect the dots. It's not out of the realm of possibility. Because at the same time, sorry, not to interrupt, leading into that finals, which is another thing that I think kind of helps prove some of these things out, is the Heat and the Mavericks played the same amount of playoff games to get to the NBA Finals that year. And in the, I forget how many games it was exactly they played. Say it was a dozen games they each played to get to the finals. The differential in free throws for the Mavericks was like 18. They had gotten like 18 more free throws than their opponents during the course of those games. At the same time, the Heat played the exact same amount of playoff games, but their free throw differential between themselves and their opponents was literally like 128, where the Heat had gotten like something like 120 points off of free throws more than their opponents, as opposed to the Mavericks getting like 18.
So you would deduct that that's a referee situation.
Yeah, that's them helping. I mean, they gave basically a game and a half worth of points to the Heat over the course of a few playoff games. And then when they reached the NBA Finals, the two teams, that differential completely vanished. Where they were almost dead equal, except in Game 6, when the Heat got like 12 or 15 more free throw attempts, where I think the NBA was trying to push Game 6 into Game 7. And that, of course, is how the Mavericks won their championship and what followed. But those are those things where, they say you can lie with statistics any way you want to, but that's a clear differential. It's a major thing that, you have to question, how is that possible?
Let's talk about Jerry Sandusky. And obviously, I mean, even people who don't follow sports probably know that situation with Penn State, pedophile, et cetera, et cetera. Do you think there's a real reason behind them literally taking down Penn State? I mean, I'm a couple hours away from Penn State. It's unbelievable how they've literally destroyed Penn State's reputation. It was a stellar reputation up until then. What do you think really happened there?
I honestly, it's one thing I did not follow very closely.
Oh, okay.
It's one of those things where, because it was so heavily covered in the media, and because of how heinous the crime was and what sort of crimes are going on, that it really wasn't related to football necessarily, although I think he was protected because of the football program, because it is like a religion there. I really just kind of let that one go. I know the guy who wrote the Game in the Game book, that Sean Patrick Griffin, who happens to be a teacher at Penn State, is working on a book about the whole situation. So I'd almost leave that more to him than me, because like you say, it's not something that really interests me too much.
I'm pretty much out of all the regular questions. I have some very deep questions that I was going to ask, but we're sort of out of time. I want people who want to ask questions, they can either ask it on the chat. I see that there's one person named Holy Wave on the phone. I'll try punching through Holy Wave, and if Chris from Oklahoma wants to call in, this is the time to do it. So we'll see how this question goes. Holy Wave, are you there? Holy Wave going once, twice?
Hey, hi, Mark.
Hey, who's this?
Hi, my name's Aaron.
Hey, Aaron.
Hey, Mark. It's good to talk to you. I've listened to all your audios, and this is my first time talking to you, so it's good to hear from you.
Great. It's good to hear from you, too. Awesome. Did you have a question for Brian, or did you want? He's going to be here for the next 22 minutes or so, or did you want to wait till after, and I'll punch it back through? It's up to you.
Oh, okay. Hey, Brian. Could I maybe get a link to your site or with your book or anything?
Yeah, I'll do that. It's I'll put it into the chat, and also it's thefixisin.net. I'll post that into the chat.
Oh, okay.
And here it is. Those listening to a replay of this, if you want to see what people are talking about while we've been talking, very interesting as always it is, you can go to www.fetch123.com/talkshoe, talk as in what we're doing, shoe as in what's on the soles of your feet. And then it's going to ask for the call ID. It's 17245. It's that number each and every time we do one of these calls. And you want to look for today, which is, once again, November 8th, 2012. Did you have any other questions?
Not really.
You want to wait till about a half hour, and then I'll take your call again?
Sure, no problem.
Okay, cool. I'll put you on hold. Alrighty, so let me get to some of my deeper questions. I guess Chris isn't calling in, and I don't see Robert. So let me put my list here. Okay. Do you think the fix has been happening since day one of all these created leagues?
No. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that so quickly. I think it's more of a factor really of the modern era of sports from like the 1960s on. However, there was a guy by the name of is it Helmbold? I talk about it in the book. I forget exactly how to pronounce his last name, but he wrote a research paper for the Rand Corporation in 1968.
Oh, the Rand Corporation is so evil. Oh, my God.
Well, it's interesting because what he wrote was, he wrote a paper called Have the World Series Been Fixed? And wrote this in 1968. And I can't find out why he wrote it, what spurred him on to do so, but he basically asked the question, did the World Series reach Game 7 more than it statistically should have? And I can't follow the mathematics behind it all, but his conclusion is that, yeah, the World Series went to Game 7 more often than it should have since the inception in 1903 up until that point in 1968. And he pointed out kind of the kind of the same things that I do, that if it went to Game 7 more often, obviously, you know, they'd make more money off television and advertising and ticket sales and T-shirt sales and hot dog sales and all those sorts of things. He said it was more financially beneficial for them to do this. And statistically, he kind of proved that it happened. Now, interesting in the book, one of the things I bring up is that from the first televised World Series, which was in 1949, up until 1989, in those 40 years, World Series reached Game 7 20 times.
Out of how many games?
Out of 40. Out of 40 World Series, from the first one being televised in 1949 up until 1989, 20 of the 40 times the World Series went to Game 7.
Half.
Yeah, which I think, I'm not a statistician, I'm not an economist, but I think that's unusual.
Mm-hmm.
I don't think that's natural, because I would think it would be more often that you'd have a 5-game or a 6-game World Series than anything.
Mm-hmm.
That it'd be harder to get the 4-game sweep or get the 7 games.
All right, so then that leads into the question, who is in on it? All right, so do you think the owners are in on the fixing?
Clearly.
Okay, do you think the referees are in on the fixing?
Clearly.
Okay, now here's the one that's going to probably bug a lot of people out, which is, do you think the players are in on the fixing?
I believe some of them are, yes. I believe some of the coaches, too.
Okay, so, right, the coaches, right. So, do you follow football still?
You know, I watch sporting events basically because now it's almost become like my job to watch sporting events.
It's sort of an OCD obsession, right?
Yeah, well, it's kind of like if I'm going to write about this and investigate it, I kind of have to know what's going on.
But isn't it kind of repugnant to you to watch it now, knowing what you know?
Oh, yeah. I mean, if I watch it, I should put it this way, I don't watch the game. Like, I won't watch a football game from beginning to end. It'll be maybe on in the background while I'm doing something else.
Mm-hmm.
And then if something happens, I'll look up and see what's going on. And even then, I mean, I probably, like this Sunday, if I watch football, I'll maybe watch it for 2 hours here and there.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I won't get up and watch the pregame shows that start at, early in the morning and follow it all the way through until, SportsCenter wraps everything up after the Sunday night game. I used to when I was, younger and more naive, but now I can't handle it. And in fact, probably if I didn't write these books and do this investigating that I do, I probably wouldn't watch it all.
Mm-hmm. The good news is I do have Chris Kendall from Oklahoma City. Hello, Chris.
Hey, what's going on? Hey, Brian.
Hey, how are you?
Good, man.
Floor is yours, dude. What questions do you have for Brian?
Oh, I have, I guess I think this question is for everybody, including Brian, and I was thinking about this today, and it was, we did with Tim Averato.
Yep, from Canada.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
And then you did the list. And on the list, you said that, and I think a lot of people would agree with this, that it's okay to tell a lie if it benefits the other person, but it's not okay to tell a lie if it benefits you. Right. Now, my question is, what if it benefits or can be construed in a person's mind that it benefits both parties?
Mm-hmm.
See what I'm getting at?
Yeah. Let me kind of explain that a little bit more. I did a list of all the. There was a 14-year-old who was on Reddit, and I really should do a broadcast, a recording about this. And he lost his father apparently, and he's like, I really need a dad. It was really kind of sad. And he's like, can you give me any fatherly advice? So of course the advice ran the gamut from very funny and sarcastic to some really good stuff. And over lunch and a pizza, I said, I'm going to take all the things that I've talked about on these calls for almost 5 years and kind of distill them down. And one of the things that I came up with was that I find, as a general rule of thumb, that if you lie, if you're thinking about whether it's okay to lie, like when your wife says, do I look fat in this dress? My rule of thumb is it's okay to lie to her if it's going to help her, but if it's going to benefit me, it's probably not okay to lie. But then that's a great question, if it benefits both. Do you have an example of that, Chris?
Well, I think in the case of, for these people who would be involved in this sort of scam with the games, being the players involved and all that, their kind of a justification is, hey, it's what people want. They want it entertaining. Why not lie to them? And it's benefiting them because we're giving them what they want, and, we get something out of it too, so why not?
What do you think about that, Brian?
Well, first, I think if you lie to your wife about looking fat in that dress, do you think only benefits her? It actually does benefit you. Because if you told the truth, you'd probably be in trouble.
Right.
So really, that lie does benefit you both.
Right.
But in terms of sports, think of a boxing match that's fixed.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and it's clearly that boxing, again, is one of the more corrupt sports out there, and fights have been fixed all the time, even recently. And in the same way, that in a way is a lie, because if you're the fighter who's going to take a dive and only one side knows that, the only loser needs to know that the fight is fixed, he's lying by fighting the way he does to lose the fight, which clearly is going to benefit the fighter who's not in on the fix, who's going to win the match, but it's also going to benefit the guy who's making the lie and intentionally losing, because obviously he's going to get something out of fixing the fight. So, I think it does. I think that's a lie that benefits all involved.
Mm-hmm.
I see Robert from Los Angeles is on with us too. You there, Robert?
Yes, I am. Are my levels okay?
You sound perfect. Now, I know you just said in the chat that you just got home, so you weren't able to listen to the interview, correct?
No, not yet.
But did you have any questions because we've been kind of talking about this beforehand, did you have any final questions for Brian as we wrap this up?
No. Well, I don't know if he was familiar with, I was just curious if he knew about the scams with all the substances like steroids and performance-enhancing substances. I don't know if that's what you guys talked about earlier.
We talked about it a little bit. We talked about Lance Armstrong and how he knew that Lance Armstrong was, a fraud from day one, basically, because of that, for that reason.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah, because from what I understand, there was a podcast that Joe Rogan interviewed a guy that also talks about how all the sporting events are rigged. And it seems like there's usually a window, and you have kind of like a 3 strikes rule that if you either fail an exam or fail to appear, that you basically just get a couple other shots. So it gives quite a big window for athletes to actually illegally use substances and get away with it.
That's interesting.
Well, with the drug testing thing, though, don't forget, too, like in the NFL and the NBA, and very well maybe the same for, like, boxing and some of the other sports, is that the leagues run their own drug testing program. So it's quite possible because they determine what's an illegal substance. They determine when the tests are run. They collect the samples. They run the tests. They get the results that they don't have to make positive results public at all. There's nothing that compels them to do this. And in fact, I think that's one of the ways, if they want to get an athlete to do their bidding, it'd be very easy to have, an NBA player test positive for cocaine, the league know about it, then approach the player and say, we can do one of two things here. We can either out you as a cocaine addict, we can, suspend you, we can, just kind of make your life a hell on top of your own addiction, or maybe when we need you to do, a favor for us, you do that favor. I mean, that's the way the mob operates and has operated for a long time. What stops the league from doing that? Because, again, there's no oversight on these leagues, and there's no oversight on their drug testing. We just, as fans, have to trust what they tell us, and I don't think there's any reason to trust them.
And that is a perfect segue into the final topic before Brian has to go, which is tell everyone about the NFL's security department.
I love NFL security. NFL security is their own, and every league has their own security department, and they're literally staffed with former members of the FBI, CIA, DEA, Secret Service, and local law enforcement. And I interviewed for my next book a man by the name of Warren Welsh, who was the head of NFL security for quite some time. And the first time I interviewed him by phone, I talked to him for about an hour. When I got off the phone with him, I still did not know what NFL security did. That's how he talked, kind of in that vague generality way. I couldn't pin down what they did and how they did it. And in all the investigation I've done in the past 5 or 6 years into these sports, I can't find an instance where, like, the FBI or law enforcement has thanked one of these league securities for informing them of some sort of corruption that was going on that the law enforcement community was able to root out. It's not like they arrested somebody and said, oh, we thank NFL security because they tipped us off on this. I can't find a single incidence of that ever happening. So what I believe these league security departments do and what they're designed to do is cover things up. I believe that's why they exist, and that's why they're out there, is to basically use those contacts they have, like within the FBI and local law enforcement, and say, hey, don't investigate that. We'll take care of it. It's an NFL problem or an NBA problem. We'll handle it internally. Thanks, but no thanks. And amazingly, I have some evidence of that occurring in some of these FBI files I have, and amazingly, like, the FBI would say, okay, you guys handle it, which just blows my mind. But that's what would happen, and I think that's what continues to happen, is that these guys exist to cover things up and keep everything quiet. And what you hear that breaks out is almost an aberration.
All right, so let's do this in wrapping this up. This has been fantastic, hour and a half, coming up on an hour and a half. At least I think so. Let's go from the top of the Empire State Building down on an elevator. Here's the elevator pitch question again. In 60 seconds, if you had my mom, who's a very sharp cookie but thinks that I'm just a crackpot when I talk about this, give her the 60-second bottom line punchline here about professional sports.
Well, professional sports are a business, and their business is entertainment. Their business is, in a sense, show business. That's where they make the vast majority of their money, is through television revenue. It's not through selling tickets into the stands. It's not selling T-shirts or hot dogs. They make money off of that, too. But they make money by people watching on television. And I don't think you would have a billion-dollar industry like the Major League Baseball or the NFL that would leave that entirely up to chance. They want to get people in their seats at home watching these games, watching their advertisers. And in order to do that, they have to make these games more interesting. They have to create storylines. They have to create stars. They have to make a reason for people to tune in every week. And I don't think they do that randomly. I think they do that very purposefully. And in order to do that, I think they manipulate the outcomes of their own games to do so. I don't think they do it in every game. I don't think they do it all the time. But when they see a moneymaker, when they see a Tim Tebow, when they see the Saints after Hurricane Katrina, and they know people are going to tune in to see what happens next week because of these teams or these players, they will ensure that those storylines go on longer than they may necessarily happen.
And let's remind everyone that the Worldwide Wrestling Federation, Vince McMahon, at one time gave the impression that he was as legitimate as the NFL, MLB, professional basketball, hockey, etc., and has now flipped and admits it's for entertainment purposes only, right?
Oh, yeah. Well, even more interesting, which I didn't know when I was kind of digging into boxing's history, at one point in time when the FBI was investigating boxing, they were investigating professional wrestling because they didn't know if professional wrestling was fake or not. I mean, they literally did not know. I mean, there's like files of them talking about, well, was this real or is this staged or what the heck's going on? So, I mean, there was a point in time, yeah, when, all this seemed very real in the professional wrestling world, and I don't see why people would think the other sports don't follow suit.
Well, that voice you're listening to is Brian Tuohy. Has an excellent website you've got to go to. I'm looking in the chat right now. Holy Wave says, just visited www.thefixisin.net. Very good site. I agree about sports being rigged. And by the way, when you come away with that conclusion, what you should really do is come back and listen to us, people like Chris Kendall, who we're going to talk to in a moment, people like Robert from Los Angeles and others, as we take it up and kick it up another notch and show that not only is professional sports rigged, but life is rigged. And we talk about solutions and we talk about hoaxes. And I, unlike Brian, am highly offended when someone calls me a conspiracy theorist, although on Brian's website he's proud to say that he's the biggest sports conspiracy theorist.
Well, I do kind of take a little bit of umbrage at it, because one of the things is that the skeptics, the people who call themselves skeptics, really aren't skeptics. They, more than anything, toe the party line, or however you want to put that.
Mm-hmm.
People like me are skeptical of the official story, yet that makes us conspiracy theorists.
Right.
Yet the people who aren't really skeptical of anything besides the people who are truly skeptical of what's going on are the ones called skeptics, and those are the ones you're supposed to believe.
Right.
I don't quite understand how that happened. I don't quite understand how those monikers got switched around. But it does kind of bother me, and I'm trying to legitimize myself more. And you're probably right. I should probably rip that down off my website, because it's true. It's a conspiracy theory in a sense, but there's so much proof and so much evidence behind these things that it's really not. It's just you may not tend to believe what I have to tell you, but really these are the facts of the matter.
Right. Yeah, you're just a critical thinker, that's all. And that has literally been wiped out of us from literally, kindergarten all the way through the education system, the newspaper, culture creation, and that's all the sort of things that we talk about through my website. My website, by the way, is www.truthin7minutes.com. That's the number 7. I came up with that name because when I first started that website and these calls that we do, I said, there's no need to talk about 9/11 for 10 years. There's no need to talk about stuff like JFK for 49 years like it's been going on. Usually it's the most simplest explanation that is what happened, and you can usually explain it away in about 7 minutes. So that's why I came up with that. So anyway, getting back to Brian. So Brian has this book. What's the name of the book again?
Well, the full title is The Fixes in the Showbiz Manipulations of the NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, and NASCAR. And
when someone buys your book, what is the most profitable way for them to buy the book? Is it through Amazon or at a bookstore?
Probably actually the most profitable is if they download the ebook, like on Kindle or from iTunes or something like that. But I'm happy if they check it out of the library and read it, in all honesty. I'm just trying to get the information out there because I'm not getting rich off this. I'm not going to get rich off of this. But I want to get this information out there. I want to educate people. I want them to learn what's really going on because I'm tired of being lied to. Mm-hmm. And I just chose to take it out on the sports leagues because nobody else would, I guess.
Right. Oh, I'm very thankful that you've written this book. I am not kidding, and I said this in the beginning. I think you wrote literally the most dangerous book ever to be published in the modern era, because when people understand that their most passionate and loved vice, their entertainment, is, as was just posted into the chat, breads and circuses, because that's what it is, breads and circuses, dog and pony show, then that's kind of like a jumping off point to us where we talk about vaccinations, and we talk about the breakup of the family and all kinds of things that no one else is talking about, because then it's a lot easier to understand that life truly, most of life truly is a hoax. And so I am very thankful that you wrote this book. I actually was talking to my wife's girlfriend who was over just before I placed this call, and I said, "You're really going to hate this person I'm interviewing tonight because she has Eagles tickets, she's a season ticket holder," and I told her about it, and she said the same thing that we talked about before. She's like, "Oh, I could believe it." And I'm like, "Really? Wow, that's great." She's like, "Yeah, when are you going to do the interview?" I'm like, "I'm doing it now." She's like, "I can't wait to listen to the MP3." So I'm going to make this MP3 available on truthin7minutes.com. Brian, if he'd like to, he can link to it. He can put it on his website if he'd like, whatever, just like Brian, to spread the word. And most important, I encourage you listening to this to spread the word. If you think that you can't fight City Hall and the corruption and this and that, I completely disagree with that. I think by us having the power to let them know that things are rigged, it actually might put an end to it. So you have my permission to pass this along. There's no charge to do it. Spread it far and wide. It's exactly an hour and a half, Brian. I really appreciate you being on the call.
Oh, no problem. I appreciate you having me on tonight. And yeah, I'll definitely put it on my website to have people listen to it.
It will be available probably, we're going to end at 11 o'clock, so by the time you wake up tomorrow morning, it'll be ready to download, and I will send you a link to it so you can take it.
Excellent. I appreciate it.
All right, Brian, have a great night. Take care.
You too. Thank you.
Oh, sure.